Imagine starting your morning as usual, reaching for your favorite mug, only to discover that your daily cup of coffee now costs 30% more. Not because of a crop failure, nor a logistical crisis, but as the direct result of a tense political standoff between two of the world's largest democracies. This isn't a scene from a speculative novel. It's the new reality shaped by a bruising 50% tariff war initiated by Donald Trump against Brazil. What forces truly underpin this dramatic escalation? Is it about economic fairness, ideological rivalry, or something even deeper that could redefine U.S.-Brazil relations for years to come? In July 2025, Donald Trump, having reclaimed a commanding role on the U.S. political stage, revived one of his most notorious tools, sweeping tariffs. This time, his administration targeted over 20 countries. But Brazil found itself singled out for the harshest treatment, a historic 50% tariff on all its exports to the United States, effective August 1st. For decades, Brazilian goods like coffee, orange juice, beef, and aircraft parts have filled American shelves, breakfast tables, and even airplane hangars. Now, these staples are at the heart of a high-stakes economic and political confrontation. This aggressive move didn't come out of nowhere. It followed a tense 90-day moratorium, during which Trump's team hinted at a global review of trade relations. Many expected difficult negotiations, tough talks perhaps, but with room for concessions. Instead, what arrived in Brasilia was a stern letter from Washington, accusing the Brazilian government of stifling American technology companies and, more provocatively, of persecuting Trump's ally, former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro faces charges in Brazil related to an alleged coup attempt. Trump's letter not only threatened tariffs, it framed the trade dispute as a defense of political kinship and a warning against what he sees as ideological overreach in the Brazilian courts. Thus, the burning question: is this really about economics? Or is it, as many experts argue, a nakedly political maneuver? Trump claims that Brazil enjoys unfair advantages in trade, siphoning profits from American workers and businesses. Yet, when economists like Paul Krugman scrutinize the data, the numbers tell a different story. According to Brazil's Ministry of Economy, the United States has actually accumulated a $410 billion trade surplus over the last 15 years. Far from being an economic victim, America has consistently benefited from its commercial relationship with Brazil. For Krugman and others, the tariffs are less about correcting a trade imbalance and more about flexing political muscle, punishing a progressive government, and defending Trump-aligned allies abroad. To grasp the magnitude of a 50% tariff, consider its immediate effect. The price of Brazilian imports into the U.S. effectively doubles overnight. Coffee, a morning essential for millions, suddenly surges in price. Orange juice, that staple of American breakfasts, becomes a luxury item. Beef, of which the U.S. imported over 214,000 metric tons from Brazil in just the first 5 months of 25. A figure up more than 100% from the previous year, now faces a cost shock that will ripple from wholesalers to restaurant menus. Aircraft components, vital for both civilian and military sectors, also become markedly less affordable, threatening supply chains and jobs far beyond the farm or factory. But the pain won't stop at the docks or warehouses. American importers and grocery chains must now decide: pass the added costs to consumers, absorb losses, or seek alternative suppliers. Most will choose the first option. Economists warn that even a moderate pass-through could push up inflation on everyday staples, with breakfast items like coffee and beef leading the charge. For U.S. families already feeling the pinch from years of economic turbulence, this new round of price hikes could prove deeply unpopular. Trump's justification, often repeated in rallies and press conferences, is that Brazil takes more from the U.S. than it gives. But the numbers refute this narrative. Over the past decade and a half, the U.S. has enjoyed a significant trade surplus with Brazil, exporting more high-value goods and services than it imports. So what, then, is the real grievance driving this sudden escalation? Some observers draw parallels with Trump's earlier trade war against China. In 2018, his administration cited intellectual property theft and trade imbalance, launching a tariff campaign that eventually saw rates climb as high as 145% on certain goods. That conflict, though controversial, followed a clear, phased framework and was rooted in years of documented complaints. The Brazil tariffs, by contrast, arrived with little warning, no gradual escalation, and no established economic rationale. Instead, they appear closely tied to political narratives, specifically, punishing Brazil's left-leaning government for perceived slights. Unlike China, which responded to Trump's tariffs with immediate and forceful countermeasures, Brazil faces a more delicate dilemma. Retaliate, and it risks igniting a trade war it can ill afford, especially with the U.S. as its second-largest trading partner. Yet, to remain passive would be to tacitly accept foreign interference in its sovereignty and judicial system. President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva wasted no time in responding. Condemning the tariffs as unacceptable, Lula invoked a new economic reciprocity law passed in April, which empowers Brazil to impose equal tariffs on nations that harm its competitiveness. "We don't accept interference or tutelage regardless of who someone is," Lula declared, signaling not only a readiness to retaliate, but also a willingness to engage in dialogue if Trump is willing to come to the table. Brazil's challenge now is to walk a tightrope. On one side lies the risk of a spiraling conflict that could devastate its export-driven economy, particularly sectors like agriculture and aerospace. On the other, the imperative to defend national sovereignty and set a precedent against political bullying. To chart a path forward, Brazil has convened a joint commission of government officials and industry leaders tasked with exploring new markets, reorienting supply chains, and reducing dependence on U.S. imports. The stakes are especially high for Brazil's most vulnerable sectors. While agricultural commodities like soybeans and sugar can, with effort, find alternative buyers, high-value industries such as aviation and advanced machinery are more exposed. These products often depend on long-standing contracts, specialized buyers, and stable political relationships. A sudden rupture could mean lost investments, canceled orders, and years of rebuilding. The broader risk is that of a downward spiral. Experts warn that tit-for-tat tariffs could spread to other sectors, eroding trust and discouraging investment on both sides of the equator. The decades-long partnership between the U.S. and Brazil, built on shared economic interests, cultural ties, and diplomatic cooperation, now stands at a crossroads. Internationally, the response to Trump's move has been swift and critical. Major global media outlets have described the tariffs as reckless and a personal vendetta wrapped in trade policy. Diplomats and analysts alike caution that using economic tools as blunt instruments of political pressure not only threatens bilateral relations, but also sets a dangerous precedent for democracies worldwide. The academic community has also weighed in. Nobel laureates Paul Krugman and Joseph Stiglitz have both denounced the tariffs in stark terms. Krugman characterizes the move as an ideological attack on Brazil's democracy, warning that the U.S. risks its standing as a fair and principled global partner. Stiglitz echoes this concern, arguing that such acts erode America's credibility and undermine the rules-based international order. Krugman, in particular, has been skeptical of the prospects for negotiation. He points to a string of failed attempts by U.S. allies to reach durable agreements with Trump, arguing that efforts at diplomacy are often interpreted as weakness, a signal for even more aggressive demands rather than a path to resolution. The deeper question, Krugman suggests, is what happens when domestic politics dictate global trade policy. Drawing a chilling parallel, he asks, if China imposed a tariff over a U.S. court ruling, would we call it diplomacy or an act of war? The implication is clear. When nations use economic power to intervene in each other's internal affairs, the very fabric of international cooperation is at risk. As the dust settles on this latest salvo in the Trump-Lula saga, both nations face hard choices. For the U.S., the promise of protecting domestic industries and political allies must be weighed against the risk of higher prices, trade disruption, and damaged alliances. For Brazil, the challenge is to defend its sovereignty without provoking a conflict it cannot win outright. In the months ahead, the world will be watching. The outcome of this tariff war will not only shape the economies of the U.S. and Brazil, but also send a powerful message about the limits and dangers of wielding trade as a weapon in the battles of global politics. Will pragmatism and diplomacy prevail, or will ideological fervor push two partners down the path of confrontation? The answer, like the price of your next cup of coffee, remains uncertain, but its effects will be felt far beyond the breakfast table. As the 2020 election draws near, American consumers are already feeling the impact of rising prices driven by new tariffs. A recent Reuters/Ipsos poll found that 73% of Americans expect these tariffs to cause further price surges, and over half oppose the measures outright. With Trump's economic approval rating dropping to just 37% in April 2025, it's clear that economic anxiety is shaping voter sentiment, raising questions about the long-term political cost of protectionist trade policies. As both countries brace for the next moves, the world watches closely. Businesses on both sides scramble to adapt, while international organizations urge restraint, warning that prolonged conflict could trigger instability across markets worldwide. For ordinary citizens, the stakes are personal. Jobs, prices, and livelihoods hang in the balance. Ultimately, the resolution of this dispute will serve as a test of leadership, diplomacy, and the resilience of the ties that bind nations in an increasingly interconnected world. Every headline carries a story beneath the surface, one shaped by ambition, strategy, and the ripple effects that reach far beyond politicians' promises. At the Curious Order, we delve into these undercurrents, exposing how global maneuvers impact real lives and reshape the world as we know it. From economic shocks to diplomatic standoffs, we reveal the unseen forces driving today's events. Join us on this journey and see the world with a deeper, more curious perspective.